Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Gabrielle Hughes, and I'm Content Marketing Manager here at ProsperWorks. Today's webinar is on taking advantage of the ProsperWorks API and how to unlock potential with powerful API. We're joined by presenters Robin Smith from VL and Bensei Orlai, who's a product manager here at ProsperWorks. If you're following the conversation on social media, you can use the hashtag #LevelUpPW, and we will be tracking that hashtag throughout the presentation and addressing any questions that come in at the end. So just a quick agenda, we're going to have an introduction from both presenters. We're going to discuss ProsperWorks and G Suite's core integrations. We're going to talk about ProsperWorks integrations beyond G Suite, so the APIs, EDI, and what it means to you. We're also going to have a couple of examples and case studies and some actionable items, what's next on the ProsperWorks roadmap, and then a little bit of time for question and answers. If you do have any questions throughout the webinar, please submit them in the questions pane of your GoToWebinar control panel. They'll be addressed during the 15-minute question and answer session at the end of the presentation. And a recorded version of the webinar will also be available after the broadcast. So I'm going to turn it over to Robin, and he's going to start talking about data integration.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Gabrielle. And Bensei, it's good to be on with you again. So what I'm going to do today is start by talking about what is data integration. Because a lot of people will look at data integration and come at it from a variety of different ways. So the most important thing to note here is that it's not just a technical process. And in this fast-paced e-commerce world, what we often find is that people tend to look at it from a technical perspective only. It's a combination of technical and business processes. So the technical will look after the movement of information, but the transformation of information is done according to business processes. So a trusted data needs to be manipulated in such a way that it takes into consideration the business rules of an organization. And the IBM definition is actually very good, which I won't repeat here, but it's one that is widely used in the integration world. So if we go to the next slide, we talk about what data integration actually is, and it's actually the connection of applications amongst themselves. And traditionally, this has always been point-to-point, but in today's world, what we're finding more and more is that integration is point-to-multi-point, where data gets used not just between two applications, but amongst multiple applications within an ecosystem or an application stack of an organization. The key thing here is that it reduces the silos and the islands of technology that really have no links between them, because now you're able to standardize and synchronize data between the two. So if you take a look at the graphic on the left-hand side of your screen, your central point of truth here is your ERP. So you could have data coming from a whole variety of sources in and out of that central application. The CRM is basically a satellite to that application, or to that central point of truth. And I think that that's the important way to look at integration. So why does integration matter? If we can go through the next slide here, integration is important for a number of reasons. One is that manual processes are slow, they're cumbersome, they're highly error prone, they take time. And they're expensive, and I think that the benchmark that one should pay attention to when looking at integration and the cost of integration or the nature of integration is the example that we have here with the $60. It costs to go through an entire cycle of an order coming off of an e-commerce cart or off of a website, or taking an order in manually through a fax or an email. It costs $60 on average, depending on the vertical. Some are more, some are less, to actually handle that order through its entire cycle from invoicing to shipment. And then you've got the issue of data errors. So sure, your data movement may look expensive up front when you're looking at integration, but the cost to move that data manually grows exponentially by the number of applications. There's no such thing as the perfect customer cycle. Data has to move through your ecosystem in a way that allows people to use the data efficiently and it be clean. So at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Bensei to talk about what are the core integrations within the ProsperWorks suite. And Bensei, I'm going to pass it over.
Thanks, Robin. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet all of you virtually. Let me give a quick background about ProsperWorks for those who are not familiar. So our app launched about a little over 2 years ago in the marketplace, and soon after that we became highly recommended, actually the only recommended CRM by Google, which we consider a huge achievement out there. From the get-go, our intention was to become an integral part of the G Suite, the Google ecosystem, and business applications in that marketplace. We did a stellar Series B to keep funding our growth, and what that allowed us to accomplish is to become the fastest growing CRM out there over the course of the past, I think, 6 or 12 months, and we're really proud of that, being the fastest growing CRM out there. Our platform or application comes in three flavors. It's depending on customers' needs, and so it's priced according to different needs for different team sizes. As I have just mentioned, we have a very deep and thorough integration with Google's G Suite, and when we designed the product, our intention was to make our app feel like a natural extension of the other Google apps inside G Suite, so that the app feels like one of those, and that feels like a natural extension of the applications that many people rely on a daily basis. So the design is based 100% on Google's material design principles. We also have a number of touch points where we essentially plug into existing Google apps. We have the Chrome extension, which brings ProsperWorks into Gmail and their newer email app inbox. We also have the Google Sheets add-on, which allows building custom reports using ProsperWorks data inside Google Sheets. And we have a number of additional initiatives in place for Google's new integration options, the Gmail add-on, as well as we have Google Slides integration. So the goal is to be a part of the G Suite app and provide a continuous experience, whether you are in ProsperWorks or any other G Suite app. Obviously, no company can build all the integrations out there on their own, so we can't build all the integrations that our customers ask for. And exactly for that purpose, what we have is a developer API, which allows developers and business partners out there to build integrations that they want to use to extend our application. So we're going to go into details about that, how our developer API works, what the philosophy behind it is. I just wanted to mention that we do have an open RESTful API that developers can use to build any application or extension on top of CRM that their businesses need. Robin, do you want to talk about, I'd like to pass it back to you so that to talk about your experience with integrating with ProsperWorks.
Sure. I think before we jump into the sort of the weeds, so to speak, Bensei, because you mentioned the RESTful nature of the ProsperWorks API, it's probably a good idea here maybe to give some high-level overview of what APIs are and the ways data can be moved between applications. So in the olden days, as my son says, stuff was done manually, and people pounded the keyboard. A semi sort of automated first step in that evolutionary track was a manual file upload and download, sometimes through a web form or sometimes through a file location in an application. Today, there's obviously a lot more ways to automate and to link applications together. So you have three primary ways of doing it. You have the granddaddy of e-commerce messaging, which is EDI, standards-based, business rules enclosed in the actual payload and in the message. A character-separated value file. It could be a comma delimited or a pipe delimited file. Again, these tend to be specific to types of applications. Legacy software may have a flat file, or it may have an EDI interface. Today, what we're seeing with the cloud and the proliferation of cloud applications is that you're seeing APIs that are either SOAP or REST-based. The SOAP standard was introduced in 2000. It's the granddaddy of APIs. Was developed by a professor at the University of San Diego, and it's a bidirectional conversation with an XML payload. And today, what you're seeing with more cutting-edge applications and applications that have not that don't have a legacy history is that they are REST-based API. So you're able to actually interact with the business objects a lot. More at a much more granular level using both JSON and XML payloads. The difference between the two, for those that are non-technical, the XML payload is about 3 times the size of a JSON payload. So JSON is much more compact and much more efficient as a way of moving information. The other thing that a REST-based API gives you that you may or may not have in a SOAP, and it really SOAP API, and it depends on the nature of the way the SOAP API was implemented, is that you have a robust audit trail, which allows you now to see exactly what is going on in the conversation between the applications. The other thing that we're starting to see now more and more is webhooks, and webhooks are an interesting piece. And Bensei, I'm going to ask you here: Does ProsperWorks support webhooks?
Yes, we do. So it's a relatively new addition to our APIs or developer tool set, and I guess we're going to cover that later on. But at this point, yeah, let's just point out that we do have webhooks.
Perfect. Well, that's good to know, because that's even more cutting edge. Webhooks are basically push technology, which is getting now into much more real time. So why is an API important? I'm going to come back to this quote, which is really, they're important because they provide access to the applications by third-party developers, but they actually allow you to interact at a much more granular level with information within an application. If you think of a flat file has a predefined amount of information, whereas an API will allow me to actually get into the business objects and deal with the data that is there. So I'm able to build much tighter integrations. I'm able to build a much more robust audit trail, and I'm also able to build much more redundancy in my integrations. So there are good and there are bad APIs, and there's a couple of nice little cartoons here. Good APIs are consistent. They are consistent in the sense that the infrastructure is well documented. There's a proper payload description, there's proper error handling, and they follow the conventions and standards of the type of API, whether they be SOAP or REST. The simpler the API, the better. Every API has its personality that reflects the programmers that developed or the designers that developed the actual API. And I'm going to leave you with these little cartoons. The first one is obviously a Dilbert, and it talks to the gobbledygook that a lot of people who are non-technical think of the integration layer. Bad APIs, and there's a whole pile of them out there, they don't get updated on a regular basis. They're inconsistent. Inconsistencies come up in error handling, where you get these very cryptic error messages that are completely meaningless to the end user. One of the common complaints here is if you do a post and the message comes back as file or variable out of range, I mean, that's meaningless. Tell me that the SKU is bad. So it's things like that where you have inconsistencies, poor documentation, and the API doesn't deliver the data that one would expect based on the documentation. So these are things to pay attention to when you're looking at applications. And I think that if you look at bad APIs, what they end up doing is they end up forcing you to do a lot more manual work to manipulate the actual information. So Benson, I'm gonna pass it back to you now to talk about the actual ProsperWorks API, and get into webhooks as well.
Yeah, so I wanted to tie back to what you mentioned, which is the personality of an API, and I would like to run with that idea here a little bit. So when we build and when we continue iterating on our developer API, we are guided by the idea of it having a personality that's nice to work with. So it's not just a checkbox that, like, yeah, we have an API and that's it, but something that is friendly to developers. And it's definitely for me as product manager, that's the level I look at. There's a lot of technical implications that our engineers are more versed in, but what I care about at the high level is that it has a character or a personality that makes it easy to work with. Our API was designed to be a versatile tool, so we tried to build it so that it supports as many use cases as possible, and also by working on supporting the latest standards, or building it using the latest standards, we try to live up to the expectations of a lot of developers out there by not having to guess or deal with all the things that bad APIs do. It is definitely a journey for us. It's not something that we do once and then it's completed, but rather it's a continuous iteration of features, minor or large, in adding functionality to our API, primarily based on feedback from our developer community. So you mentioned webhooks. That is one of our latest additions to our APIs, where webhooks are essentially real-time notifications. When a record is added, changed, or deleted in ProsperWorks, then we can send a notification to another system of the user's choice and let that system know that, hey, there's been an event involving a record here, so that other system can react within a matter of seconds, really, and trigger other processes in those systems or accommodate those changes. And this is a way to keep more than one business system in sync in essentially real time. So within a matter of a few seconds, both systems can be up to date. A good API is a robust API, and what I wanted to talk about here a little bit is like what we mean by robustness. So our API can serve data needs and integration needs on a wide range of wide scale of needs, anywhere from something as simple as a lead intake form or a web to lead form where there's only a handful of transactions a day. So we have users who use our Dev API just for that. On the other end of the range, we have actual customers who feed the data warehouse using the data from our Dev API, where they synchronize their entire data set every night, and then they make business intelligence decisions from the data warehouse. So our API supports both ends and everything in between on this range. And for us, that is an ongoing challenge to continue supporting that as our customers and their needs evolve. So what this means, all these things that the API can do, or the way the API was designed and architected, what does it mean in terms of business? The way I like to look at it is CRMs, from our observation is that CRMs have a life cycle within organizations. When an organization starts using a CRM, initially they use it for contact management, managing their customer database. Then the natural next step is to manage it for all kind of sales-related activities, manage sales projects in there. But then as the data accumulates and there's more and more data regarding customers and transactions with them, then CRMs tend to become a central hub for a lot of things in an organization other than sales. So organizations discovered that getting data into their CRM before sales, essentially marketing and lead generation or demand generation, and marketing campaign information becomes just as important, so that by the time sales comes around, then there's already information and a rich context of customers actually before they become customers. And then on the other end of the sales cycle, there's all the billing, project management, fulfillment, or delivery aspects, depending on whether you're a product company or a service company. Sales projects don't end when sales closes. Actually, that's where a lot of exciting stuff starts happening, and a lot of companies choose CRM to track that information in their CRM as well. Again, project information, implementation, customer support, and all those things can be in CRM. And our way of looking at APIs is to support developers to pull all that information and manage all that information inside ProsperWorks easily and efficiently. I know you guys, Robin, you guys prepared with some case studies, which I think is going to put all this discussion into context. So let me turn it back over to you, and then let's dive into those case studies.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Bensei. That was a great overview. I think it's really important too to stress the evolutionary nature where people go along a path, and I think that you have to look at the kinds of things that you can do from an integration perspective in the same way. Collecting leads and managing those sorts of things, doing your sales activities is one thing, but you have within the whole ProsperWorks piece the notion of companies and people. And I think this is where you can now start to look at, okay, how do I leverage the API to extend the use into my other business areas? So we've got two case studies for you. They're similar, but they're also a little bit dissimilar in the sense that they touch two very different aspects of a business that is doing e-commerce. So the first one we're going to talk about is integrating your e-commerce store. And basically this is a shopping cart. Integrating your online shopping cart to your ProsperWorks. instance. And what we're gonna go through, and there is a much deeper presentation and webinar on this subject that we did previously. So I'm going to go over this at a much higher level. But basically, within ProsperWorks, you can leverage both the opportunity funnel as well as some of the functionality within the API to integrate your e-commerce transactions. The nature of that is that you've got to have defined your workflow that you want to set up in ProsperWorks ahead of time before you can interact with it with the API. So the idea here is that you think through the process of how are you going to use the data as it cycles through the business process or the business funnel that is going to allow you now to create a more meaningful opportunity. So the example that we've got is actually integrating Shopify, and this could be Shopify, the basic Shopify or Shopify Plus, to ProsperWorks. So if you go to the next screen here, we've actually got an example of what can be done posting to the central blob. The central blob in the ProsperWorks language is that central part of your screen where you see the order. This is an order that has come off of a Shopify store that has been associated with a customer called Jessica, who ordered online, and she ordered a black skull and crossbones bandana and a 27-inch monitor. So this was kind of a funny store. But what you've got in the center there is the actual order. What this does from a business perspective is it allows you, from a customer service perspective, to be able to pull that order up associated with that customer, or see the history of orders that have been that have been placed by this customer right in your CRM while you're providing true customer service, which means you're not having to go to your shopping cart to look up that order. What we did here with this particular order was that we created a custom activity associated with the blob called web orders. This actually then fed into a pipeline where we tested, did the customer exist within ProsperWorks? If the customer didn't exist, then we posted that order, and we tagged that order according to the pipeline, the opportunity pipeline that had been previously set up. So in this case, we did a very, very simple one, ready to ship. This is the order that came off of the cart. We created an in-process bucket, which meant that the customer service rep or the person who was handling the processing could move that order. We could also have done this through the API had there been an external source for that. And then ultimately and finally, the order was shipped. Again, all of these steps can be handled through the API. This now gives you a couple of levels of visibility around the customer flow, and that is, I can now have a workflow related to my orders, and my customer service people can also now look and see where that order is in the process if somebody were to phone up and ask. So this is a very high-level overview. There is, as I said, a complete webinar that we did where we go into a lot more depth of how we did this and so on. So our second case study is around marketplaces. People today in the omni-channel world are selling and using CRMs both for their B2C, but also B2C and B2B on marketplaces. So you may be selling on Amazon, whether it's Vendor Central or Seller Central. You may be on eBay or Rakuten or Jet or Walmart. The integration and the workflows can be set up in exactly the same way as we showed you with the e-commerce cart. Obviously, you would set the workflow up and you would set the design of that workflow up in a way that reflects the way you do business and the customer service component that you want to bring to the table. You could set them up as individual pipelines, or you could set them up as marketplace pipelines. I think the more marketplaces you were selling to, the more I would want to separate them out. But anything that has an API on the other side can be integrated to using the ProsperWorks API. So if we go into Amazon, for example, I could take the order off of Seller Central, or I could take the order in an EDI format off of Vendor Central, extract the customer information, test against the ProsperWorks API to see if that customer existed. If that customer didn't exist, I could create that customer and then post the order to the blog in much the same way that I did with the Shopify cart. And just as an aside, the e-commerce model that we talked about in the first case study could actually be done with Magento, BigCommerce, Lemon Stand, or any of the other main cart platforms that are out there. So in an ideal world, the Amazon and the marketplace order should, just as your e-commerce order should go in through an ERP or an order management system from an accounting perspective. You also have a discrete function, which is customer service, and the same processes that apply to the ERP integration could apply to your CRM integration. So depending on how you design your workflows and depending on how you work through your processes with each one of your channels, these can be set up and these can be integrated using the API. So some examples with Amazon is getting your orders, posting your order acknowledgements, posting the fulfillment up information. This all goes up to Amazon, but you could actually also mirror some of that information in your CRM. So let's look at a summary of these. These are two high-level cases of where integration can be used and leveraging the richness in the ProsperWorks API, and also leveraging the webhook functionality that exists. Let's look at integration strategies, because one of the really important things is that businesses, everybody talks about integration and how important it is, and I don't disagree with that. But I think that there are different things that are right at different points in the evolution of a business, and I think it's really important that people understand that. So our next slide talks about what, and this is a horrible slide, so it's one to be looked at down the road. But basically, the more sophisticated the integration, the more expensive it's going to be. The long-term cost is going to be far lower because you are paying up front. The danger is that people get hooked and sucked into point-to-point integrations, and they don't think about how you use data in other areas. So we often see people integrating from the shopping cart to their order management, but the CRM is sitting out there by itself, and people are manually entering that information into the CRM. Whereas if you could pull the feed from the cart and put it into the order management and the CRM at the same time, you've now got a much better and a much more complete picture of what is going on in the business. So these are some of the things that you need to think about. And what we've done here in this chart is we've mirrored the evolution that we talked about, which was manual data entry all the way up to using a platform like our VL OMNI, which is data integration as a service, and looking at the effectiveness, scalability, customization, short-term costs, etc. So these are all things that as you're looking at where you sit in the evolution of your business, these are things to think about. So to continue on with that, the things that you need to be thinking about is growth. Is it steady? Is it rapidly growing? Is it growing so fast that your inability to handle the volume is happening because your applications can't scale? What's your application mix? Do you have a few core applications? Is data moving efficiently between all those applications? Or do you have a really complex mix of applications? More and more what we see today is that most scaling businesses have between 5 and 7 applications, and only half of those end up being integrated, and the rest, the data moves manually. Do you have custom solutions? As you scale up, things that are developed in-house, you start off, you didn't have a lot of money. Are they currently customized to the way your business has evolved? And this is one that I talk about a lot, and I know Bensei is a strong proponent of this, is that what's your data strategy? Do you have a high-level data strategy on how data moves throughout all of your organizations? And then the elephant in the room, as your business scales, do you get into doing things like EDI because you're selling to the major retailers? So these are all things to think about. And I think that there are many people on this call, many people listening in, who are going to be at various stages in the evolution of their organizations. And I think that the CRM component increasingly in the omni-channel e-commerce, whether it's B2B or B2C, is becoming so important that if you don't have that data strategy of how you're going to leverage the tools that ProsperWorks brings to the table, I think you're missing out on some really good opportunities here. So Benson, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Yeah, on this same slide, while we're hovering over it, one thing I wanted to add
Sure.
from our experience is that a couple thoughts. One is that solving these integration problems at a smaller company size is always easier. A lot of companies discover the need for these integrations through business processes starting to break down as they try to scale up or try to, move, grow in a non-linear way. That, like, hey, these things are failing us big time. It always helps to think of these problems ahead and solve them, or try to at least identify these processes and problems on a smaller scale. So when the companies are smaller, it's a mindset, in my opinion, where, like, okay, these are the it's okay to do things manually, but think of it in a way that, like, could we do this if all of a sudden we have to do this 5 times as frequently, and what would be the cost of us not being able to do this? An example would be, we can, with our current Excel-based process, we can fulfill 10 orders a day, but can we do it with 100 orders? And should we think about, how we're gonna get there? So that's what I wanted to point out, that some of these problems are easier to think about and solve early on, and it's easier to change a team around and educate a team, and they're smaller. The other thing is that
completely agree, Benson. I think that to build on what you just said, I think the mistake that people make is that they get used to doing things within the application mix that they've got, and they become complacent about processes, and then they have that scaling in the business, and all of a sudden they, as you point out, it's easier to think about these things when you're small. They haven't thought about them because they've fallen into a complacency, and now all of a sudden it's a serious crisis.
And it's completely okay. I need to add that it's completely okay to not wanting to automate or think ahead too much. But the other thing I wanted to add is have a map of any sort of these things early on, and it doesn't have to be a perfectly designed flow chart. It can be just a whiteboard whiteboard shot where, like, hey, this is how data moves in our company, or this is how we get stuff done at this company, even though it's a manual process. To have that map and understand where the value is created, or where are the things that, what are the touch points that must keep working as the company grows, is a very helpful exercise from my experience. That, hey, these are right, and then it's okay to, again, it's okay to have Excel in that mix early on. Or like, yeah, these are the 5 things we do in Excel, as long as it's understood. There's a visualization of that map, like how Excel files are being passed, and if they are mission critical, then keep an eye on them as the company grows.
Oh no, I completely agree. And actually, one of the actionable items on one of the next slides is to do the yarn experiment. And basically what the yarn experiment is to get everybody in the room that handles a process, take the first person who handles that process, put a ball of yarn or some string in their hand, and move the ball of yarn or string around the room with all the touch points of that process. And you'll see how human nature tends to make things far more complex than they have to be. So
it sounds like a fun team building exercise.
Well, it actually is, and where we've done it on with some customers, it's a real eye opener to people. They're laughing, and and I've heard people say, "Oh, man, are we ever dumb? I mean, why do we have so many people doing these things?" Anyway, so and I think maybe here, so that we leave time for questions, is if we can jump forward to the actionable items. And one more, there you go. Basically, leaving you with 4 actionable items. One, and I think that Bensei really summed it up nicely, is look at your data holistically. Look at your business, look at how it's growing. How does data move amongst all the bits and pieces? We just talked about the yarn experiment. Leverage the functionality that exists in your applications in number 3. And anything outside of those applications, I think it's really critical that you look for a proper API. We've talked about some of the characteristics that need to be in an API. And today, more and more webhooks. Webhooks are becoming increasingly important in application connectivity. So I think with these 4 actionable items, I think that you can build yourself a good roadmap of where your business can go with the API. So Bensei, I'm gonna pass it back to you here quickly. About where ProsperWorks is going in terms of the future, and obviously I know that you're not going to give us too far forward looking perspectives, but if you could let us know where you see things going in the ProsperWorks world.
Yeah. So the way I would like to approach it is talk about what is on our minds in terms of next steps, near term and mid-term for our APIs. So as I said before, it's an ongoing work. It never really ends. And then what we would like to do is foster more direct feedback with our developer community. And on that purpose, we're looking to set up a developer community. In the invitation email for this webinar, we sent out a 1-question survey. People who have not responded yet, I would truly appreciate if they did. Essentially, where the question is about where people want that community exist, on what platform, whether LinkedIn or elsewhere. The other one is that we have an upgraded developer API documentation in the works to be published within a week or 2, which is going to provide a lot more information about how our API and webhooks and everything works. Also, through working with a number of customers, building and helping them build integrations, we're kind of learning about different cases of integration. As I mentioned before, involving before and after sales processes. We have had successful integrations built with applications like Marketo, Zendesk, text messaging applications, Slack or Maven Link. And so we take these projects and take the pieces of learning from those that other users, Dev API users, can benefit from and incorporate them into the app. So it's a constant two-way communication that really drives us, and not so much like what we think we should be building. So that's how we think about the future of our developer API.
You know, which is excellent, because I think that certainly one of the things from our perspective at VL that we don't see a lot of is developers wanting feedback on how their APIs are actually being used. I think that makes for a far richer experience, and I think it makes for a more robust API. So on that note, we're coming to the questions and to the end here. I'm just going to just talk very quickly about VL and what we do. We have a platform called VL OMNI, which is a hosted integration platform where we can build and host complex integrations. For those of you who are attending IRCE in Chicago in June, we will be exhibiting. We will be close to Shopify, so if anybody wants to come by and to talk to us, we will be there. And I would welcome the opportunity to talk to any ProsperWorks users that happen to be there. So, Gabrielle, I think we can pass it back to you for questions. And Bensei, thank you very much.
Yeah, if you guys have any questions, go ahead and submit them now. We'll go look and see what people are sending in. Brandon's wondering if we can share the webinar with the e-commerce integration. That was done back in December. I can definitely send you the link to that. It's also available on the ProsperWorks blog. Brandon's also wondering, do you have any histories or specialists for integrating with Xero, or do you have another suggestion for invoice, quoting, and accounting?
Xero can be integrated to ProsperWorks. It would depend on what the workflow would be. I would start by defining what the workflow is. Xero does have an API, but in terms of platform functionality, it is limited. So if it's to move customers from Xero to ProsperWorks or vice versa, that can be done. Invoices from Xero to ProsperWorks could be done also, much in the same way that actually the e-commerce orders got passed.
Great. Another question. My marketing agency has integrated my e-commerce store to some of my other applications. Can they work with ProsperWorks too?
I would say yes. I guess it depends on whether the marketing agency has the expertise to do that. I mean, that would be the first question. What we often see is that the marketing agencies tend to want to do only the stuff that they do, which is the user experience, and they move reluctantly into other areas that are outside of their core control. So, but in theory, I mean, if somebody has the expertise to talk to the ProsperWorks API, then there's no reason why they couldn't. We could also help. So.
And then, what are your thoughts on integrating ProsperWorks with integration services such as Zapier?
We have a library of Zapier connectors currently available, and that's another aspect of integration that we look at as an ongoing process. So the short answer is it is readily available, and we actually have a very rapidly growing Zapier user base.
Yeah, and there's also a webinar about ProsperWorks and Zapier coming up next Wednesday, the 17th. So be sure to register for that. Other questions? Our business is looking to migrate to ProsperWorks, but we have some custom programming that integrated our old CRM with our web store. What are your recommendations for next steps?
Who do you want to answer that one, Bensei or myself?
From an API standpoint, product standpoint, I can say it's completely doable. We're ready to do it. You are the domain expert, Robin. In terms of,
Yeah, I think
how to do it.
Yeah, no, I think Bensei, the thing I would say there from a business perspective is that the first step would be to look at what has actually been done with the old CRM. Do you have documentation? If it hasn't been documented, then I would think that you would want to document it. Because there are going to be two aspects to that. One is going to be the whole data migration, which probably will require some form of data cleansing. I know that when we at VL went through our ProsperWorks migration from Goldmine, it took us about 2 weeks to clean the data to make sure it was lining up properly within ProsperWorks. So it's not just the API connectivity, which is very critical, but it's also making sure your data is clean and that you have your integration workflows already defined.
Okay, another question. How long would it take to implement this integration into our account if we're already on Shopify? Will we have to make any changes to how we have it configured?
You wouldn't make any changes to your Shopify store, other than maybe look at the way the order status is configured. Typically, we would pull ready to ship orders off of Shopify. The biggest amount of work is going to be on the ProsperWorks side to define if you're going to use the opportunity funnel, which I encourage people to do, because then you can now start to use the order metrics in the ProsperWorks dashboard. Would be to define your pipeline funnel, and to make sure that that fits with your business. That's the first step. The actual integration then takes a couple of days. So that, it's not an enormous job, but I think that you need to step back first and think about the pipeline workflow that you want to implement.
And then going from there, can email automation be included in this type of integration?
Yes, that would be more of a Bensei question. As you move things through the pipeline, could you add email automation into that?
That's an interesting question, because ProsperWorks by itself does not have the capability to send emails on behalf of users or customers. So that might warrant the need for a third-party service that can send emails. However, this would be a good use case for webhooks where, let's say, a new order is created, then a webhook is sent to a system that is going to send off the notification. So I think it's doable, but for full disclosure, ProsperWorks itself does not currently have the capability to send emails. However, on a slightly unrelated note, we have a lot of work on the way to build emailing capabilities into ProsperWorks, including email templates, and then supporting them through automated actions. So in the future, this situation might change.
Great.
Yeah, I also think, Gabriel, that a lot of that functionality really should be set up in the cart. When your order is I mean, you could, as you move something through a pipeline in ProsperWorks, you could at the same time trigger a process on the Shopify cart using the API to actually trigger that outbound email. So there's a couple of ways to do it. I think it's not cut and dry where it should be. So.
Cool. So if there are no other questions, I'll give you guys another 30 seconds or so to submit. Otherwise, we'll wrap things up. I'd like to thank Robin and the VL team for helping us out with this and joining us, and Bensei, of course.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah. If you guys have any questions, you can email info@prosperworks.com, or you can tweet at us or at VL_OMNI, and we'll get back to you. Anything else?
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to work with you guys as well.
Yeah.
And Bense, it's great to be on.
Likewise, thank you for everyone's time here today.
Yep. Great. Okay.
Thank you, Gabby.
Yep. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.